Welcome to Notable Approvals. I am attorney Amanda Shaffer. Today we have another interesting case to talk about. Before I get to it, quick reminder, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are watching. And if you find this video to be helpful or know someone who may, hit that share button, that save button, so that they so that you can find it and that other people can. All right, let's get to the case. So this is an interesting one that I think a lot of people out there are going to be interested in hearing. I guess that's the word of the day. So the client who lives in Brooklyn, um, she is a native and citizen of Jamaica. She filed her she's married to a US citizen. He filed the I-130 marriage petition for her back in 2018. They concurrently filed for the adjustment of status. Now, they did file without a lawyer. So I don't know exactly what was submitted initially, but what I do know is that in November of 2019, they had their first marriage interview. And again, I'm not sure, last time I spoke to them about that part of the case was in 2020 when they came to hire us because they had yet to hear back after the interview. But essentially, they I they went without an attorney, and I don't remember what evidence they brought back then. But when they contacted us, we entered our appearance as their attorney, and we sent the letter asking for a case status update, explaining, hey, they had their interview back in 2019, November 2019. I think at that point it had been at least a year. And the notice when you go to an interview and they hold it for review, it says give us 120 days. Now, just a little tip out there. When immigration says 120 days, they don't mean 120 days. That's like I've never it's very rare that when they say 120 days that it actually happens. Honestly, I don't know why they don't up the time, but it drives people nuts because you're expecting to hear something. I totally understand that. So we contacted them, and I know she contacted us a few times asking if we heard anything, and then I said, my guess is that you are in line for a Stokes interview. For those of you who don't know what a Stokes interview is, it's when, and it's called different things in different jurisdictions, but it's all the same. It's when they separate you and your spouse and question you separately. So let's say they take the US citizen first, they ask your spouse questions, then you switch, you're in there alone, they ask you the same questions, then they bring you back together and they say, okay, I asked this question, you answered this way, you said A was the answer, you said B was the answer. Why is there a difference? So that's essentially a Stokes interview. It's a lot more adversarial than um, you, what I generally call the first interview, which is where you're in there with your spouse the entire time. And the thing about Stokes interviews is that they take a very long time. I was actually scrolling through some of my old cases. I did have a case approved at a Stokes interview in 15 minutes. That is a rarity, and I think it was a mistake that they scheduled them for Stokes. But otherwise, because of how much time they have to allot for it, you can end up waiting for many years before you get a Stokes interview, which is why it's always better to start your immigration journey with an experienced immigration attorney. And if you are on YouTube or Facebook, our contact information is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. If you are on Instagram, you can go to our bio page. So, could this have been avoided? Possibly. They are very much a real couple, but there's some interesting quirks about this case, and it's why I wanted to talk about it. This is not just the average case where the client comes to us because the case has been taking too long. We got a little bit more here. So the client like I said, lives in Brooklyn. Her husband actually lives in South Carolina. And the reason he lives in South Carolina is because of work. And the reason she lives up here is because she has a child, and the child's father lives up here. And there's visitation rights. So the couple sees each other every few months. This is, and I'm going to explain how we overcame that in a second. It's also an interesting case because there really weren't any joint financial evidence. I mean, they completely live separate at this point in time. They had photos of a vacation they took to Jamaica together. They had letters from family and friends, but no shared bills, no joint taxes, no, actually, I'm not sure about the joint taxes, but definitely no shared bills, obviously, no shared lease. Um, so normally when I talk about these cases, I talk about how we had all this joint financial evidence and all of that. So, and I have had cases before where the clients live separately and we were able to get it approved. But how do you do it? Well, preparation is key. That's number one, preparation. Aaron sat with the clients. He had 2 prep sessions with them, and he went into a lot of detail about the client's uh, courtship. So basically, how they met, that type of thing. How did you meet? What did you do when you started dating? And how long after you met did you start dating? When did your relationship turn romantic? Who proposed to who? Did you talk about it? What's your plans for the future? That type of thing. It was the little details, and it's always the little details that matter. You if something is memorable to you, like when you met the love of your life, um, I can tell you for me, with my husband, I met him at a Halloween party at his apartment, uh, on October. It was a week before Halloween. It was a week where Halloween, a year of Halloween was on a Wednesday, so it was the week before Halloween. Not I said November, October. And he was dressed as Snow White. I was dressed normally because my friend who invited me um, to the party told me she wasn't wearing a costume and no one else was, so I didn't. And that was the first night that we met. And I can tell you where we went on our first date. It was on 86th Street, an Italian restaurant that no longer exists. And he went to Penn State. He wore his nice button-up Penn State shirt with it was like a formal button-up shirt, the little Penn State logo. I went to Michigan, so he was, you know, being a little funny. And I was very embarrassing during the dinner and surprised he wanted to see me again. That is really detailed, and that is very hard to make up, which is why it's believable, and it is true. So we made sure with this couple that they really focused on the little things, on the details. Ask people, what did you like about the person? Why did you decide to date them? And they'll say, oh, they were very nice. They seem very genuine. Well, nice and genuine are important things, but that's not specific. What immigration wants to hear is like maybe you guys bonded over something. You enjoyed watching soccer together, or he made you laugh, or she uh, was very down to earth and outspoken, and you had similar political views. I don't know. I'm making things up now, but the point is, it's really these small little things that matter. And it's always good to make the officer, the USCIS officer, smile if you can. How do you do that? Well, they want to hear. They have so many people come in with fake relationships or not being able to answer the questions that when they do hear these nice little cute things, it does make them smile. Like I had a client once who they said they worked in the same office, and that's how they met. And one day, the the male left a post-it note on the girl's desk and said, "Will you go out with me and check yes or check no. And she checked yes and then put it back on his desk. And I could see the immigration officer crack a smile and, kind of jot that down. And I already knew that couple had plenty of joint finances and everything. I knew they'd be fine. But it was the very fact that they had this specific detailed story about how they met that they were able to tell. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting that you make up how you met. If you did not meet in any cute or interesting way, then you don't you still should know how you met, when you met, where you met. Helps to know other details like what someone was wearing, why you went up to the person or the person came up to you in the first place. And then you want to be able to walk through your relationship with those steps that I was talking about. So the prep session, absolutely key. Now, the second thing, and this is key for people who are not living with their spouse. I have had many cases approved where the spouse lives here, or one spouse lives here and one spouse lives. I've had Florida, I've had Philadelphia, I've had Maryland. I mean, this case, South Carolina. I've all the states. And that's okay, but you need to have a reason. And in this case, the husband's job was in South Carolina. He couldn't get equivalent work in New York, and it wasn't the whole time they've been living apart, but they have been for a while, and it's working for them. And for her, she has a child, and the child has his child's father lives in Brooklyn or in New York City, and there's a visitation order, and visitation and custody orders sometimes have clauses in them that say that you're not allowed to move, especially if you're the custodial parent, that you're not allowed to move more than 20-mile radius. It could be whatever geographic limitation is on it. You're not allowed to move outside there without court permission. So that can make it really hard for someone, especially if, look, your spouse has a good job. You can't move down there now without court permission, and they might say no. And if you don't want to give up custody of your child, which is perfectly understandable, then that's what happens. And it is always, the courts prefer that the children have both parents in their lives. So we had to explain that. It's also good to be able to answer questions about, well, what's your future plans? I mean, are you going to be married and live separately your entire life? That's not ideal, you know? So they, you know, I wasn't in the prep session, so I don't know exactly what their future plans were, but I do know that a lot of times in these situations that the immigrant is waiting for their green card to free them up a little, to be able to move. In this situation, because of the child, I think they're going to have to figure things out. And they only see each other every few months, but they were able to answer basically every question about each other. They knew each other really well. And this is a great example of a case where you don't, I stress so much in my videos how important the joint finances are, how important all the evidence is. And I am not saying that that is not true at all. I mean, 100%, it would have made their case possibly go quicker if they had all this other stuff. You want that stuff no matter what, but just because you lack that joint evidence doesn't mean you can't get your case approved if you know how to do it right. And you have reasonable explanation for not having things like they, I'm sure, send money to one another. They live separately. They're not going to be on each other's bills. They could have been, but I don't think that they are with each other in one location enough that it made sense, or they just didn't. Either way, they had to explain that. And then the final thing that is really key for an interview, for any interview with immigration, is your confidence, your attitude. I tell clients all the time, get a good night's sleep the night before, eat breakfast, or lunch, or if it's later in the day, because expect to wait and then you can't really eat in the waiting room. And be positive. Don't, everyone's nervous a little bit. That's okay. But you can't, if you walk in there and you say, I'm nervous, or think I'm nervous, and then you have trouble answering the questions, you're not going to get approved. I had a couple that I'm dealing with right now. Um, Actually, that case, they're no longer a couple, but we have to deal with their Stokes interview denial. And previously, they had put in an affidavit trying to explain the discrepancies in their answers after the Stokes. And a couple of the responses were, I was nervous, I forgot. And I turned to the client and I honestly said, look, that's not going to cut it. I'm not surprised they ended up denying this, or because you're allowed to be nervous and miss one question, maybe even two questions, but these weren't things that your spouse should have just forgotten. So being nervous is okay, but if you have a real relationship, and this is also what I always tell clients before walking into the interview, you have a real relationship. You know that deep down. So you have nothing to worry about. You just have to be honest. It's all about that attitude. Okay. So small details and attitude are really going to get you a long way. And that's going to be even if you're lacking evidence. But you have to be prepared to address all of these issues. Is it normal that one spouse lives in New York and one spouse lives in South Carolina and they see each other um, once every few months? I would say that's not a typical relationship, but the law doesn't say that there's such thing as a typical relationship. So as long as you're able to explain your living situation and it makes sense for you and it's clear that it's still a real relationship, then you're good to go. So this client, we're just waiting on the green card to get approved. Normally I like to wait until the green card gets approved to talk about it, the case. However, this I'm hopeful this client will. She entered with a visa, no criminal history. I don't see any inadmissibilities, but I felt that this was a really interesting case to talk about in terms of just the marriage petition part of it because of their unique situation of where they live and the evidence. And a lot of times we get people coming to us in a similar situation or contacting us saying, what do? I don't have this. So it is definitely possible, but especially when you're in this situation, you really want to have an experienced immigration lawyer helping you from the beginning to minimize the time. Because remember, she filed it in 2018. It is 2023. It was September 2018. 5 years. 5 years. That's a long time. A lot of times relationships don't even last that 5 years because of how stressful the whole situation could be. But the good news is once her green card's approved, she will get a 10-year green card instead of a 2-year green card because they have been married for so long, and we'll be able to file for naturalization based on the 3 years. Actually, you have to be married and living together. I think their hope is that by then they will be. But that would be an interesting naturalization otherwise. So that is all for today. Don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you're watching. If you need help with your immigration case, YouTube and Facebook, our contact information scrolling across the bottom of the screen. If you're on Instagram, go to our bio page and you can find it there. And thank you all for watching and have a great day.